I have recently been going back and played some older games such as Battlefield 1, Battlefield 4, since I do enjoy checking out how some of these games that I used to play quite some before are doing now, especially now in the beginning of a new year. I then also played Battlefield 2042, a game that I never really got into that much, but I did also that because I wanted to feel and compare it to Delta Force, as you see here when it comes to the gameplay. Since Delta Force has been inspired by Battlefield 2042, if I'm gonna be a bit nice or diplomatic, or they've been copying and pasting quite some from Battlefield 2042 into their own game, if I'm gonna be a bit more harsh or straight to the point. So I played Battlefield 2042 and Delta Force back to back in 2 days before making the actual video when it comes to this more of a emotional comparison, if you will. And besides what I felt about it and what I prefer at the end of the day, I started to think about the future of Delta Force, being a fairly new game and one of the few Battlefield-like games out there at the moment. I then started to think about game modes and what you can actually play and choose from so far in a game such as Delta Force. Because one thing that often comes up when discussing games is content, or lack of content. Sure, performance, meaning technical shortcomings or problems, it's also often mentioned, but very often lack of content comes into the discussion or comment sections. Some games have even lost parts of their player base through the years just because there aren't enough to do in the game to keep the most busy players engaged. Well, this can soon lead to an overall fatigue of the game, so to say, which can, among other issues, lead to a game being sunset, which is the worst case scenario, of course. Well, Delta Force is still a new game per se, and did launch their Season 2 here in the West not too long ago. But there have been criticism when it comes to, for example, the 2 new maps regarding poor map design and imbalanced operators alongside with ability spam, weapon unbalances, that players has talked about also before Season 2 as well. These are very important things, of course, and can definitely make or break a game or the experience when it comes to playing it. I've also mentioned worse performance after the recent updates, meaning that I don't get the same amount of FPS that I was able to reach before in Season 1. But besides this, I also started to think about what kind of game Delta Force is and what else they could potentially do besides technical fixes and fine-tuning in order to optimize the game as much as possible. Delta Force definitely plays and feels a lot like a Battlefield game, but at the same time, gunplay that reminds me more about Call of Duty sometimes than an actual Battlefield game. At least that's how it felt for me when going between BF1, BF4 and Battlefield 2042 and then back to Delta Force. With that said, I believe that Delta Force could benefit from adding more game modes into the game. Operation is kind of its own thing, being an extraction shooter. Warfare has variations of Battlefield-like game modes, and they've been also trying out something new when it comes to Hot Zone 3 versus 3 versus 3. But I'm talking about adding more classic respawn game modes such as Team Deathmatch. Could be different team sizes depending on if they would choose to cut a smaller portion of an existing map for that game mode, for example 6v6 or 12v12. Well, I believe that players would appreciate this, maybe not so much that die-hard Battlefield player, but those that are coming over from, let's say, Call of Duty or maybe hasn't played so many large-scale FPS games before. It will also be a place to rank up weapons, maybe in a faster manner, but also a place to test out new loadouts before bringing them into the Warfare game modes. I especially believe that this could be a good move when they finally decide to port the game also for console, which of course a lot of people are waiting for, since console players are the majority of players that you'll find in games such as Call of Duty. Adding game modes such as TDM and objective respawn game modes such as Domination or Capture the Flag could potentially attract players that otherwise wouldn't try out a game such as Delta Force. If they then like the gunplay experience in these game modes, they maybe also try out the more Delta Force-alike game modes that is to be found in Warfare. Well, because content can be a lot of things. New weapons, new operators, like new camos, new maps, etc., you know. But new game modes would be a bigger addition and change to the game, if you will. And I remember that some Battlefield players weren't too happy, of course, to see, for example, Domination when it first showed up in Battlefield 3, I believe. Because you have to be very careful, of course, and have knowledge of what smaller portion of a certain bigger map that you can use in order to get a good game flow in the game without also breaking spawn points completely. With other words, I don't think that it would have a negative impact on Delta Force, taking away focus or players for that sake from the already existing game modes. I mentioned Call of Duty earlier, and since Call of Duty overall and Warzone is on a kind of a decline, it could also be a good moment, a good timing if you will, once more to offer a similar experience, but in a free-to-play FPS game such as Delta Force. I mean, we could even start off a bit lighter, if you will, not implementing these smaller sized game modes. We could start by also adding a version of Warfare where operators do not have their abilities. That, I believe, would be appreciated by a lot of players, and it would definitely make Delta Force play different from how it plays today. But maybe that kind of a game mode would become too popular, so no one wants to go back to the ability-like Warfare version after experiencing a more clean gun-focused version of the same game mode. I'm mainly joking now, or am I? Well, anyhow, I also believe that Delta Force wants to and also need to strengthen their position and also player base, meaning the community around their game as much as possible before the next Battlefield game will be released, which might happen already in October this year. Because a lot of focus will be put onto that release, and a lot of people playing Delta Force right now will move over to a new, hopefully good Battlefield title. So again, if the two games gonna coexist, which I hope they will be able to do, especially since Delta Force is a free-to-play option, I once more believe that other smaller sized game modes as mentioned could be a way to strengthen and increase the player base as well over time. Yeah, releasing a new game, no matter what genre it is, can be a really hard task nowadays, since it's very easy to be forgotten too early, meaning not being able to get a chance to establish your game. Time has changed, and nowadays the market when it comes to certain genres is somewhat saturated, which means that you gotta stand out in some way. It could be a very unique or personal kind of gaming experience that is hard to find elsewhere, which is not really the case when it comes to Delta Force. Or you design a game that is very similar to something that has been proven to work for others. But if you do that, you have to do it at least as good as your competitors, or even better, make your game rise above the average titles out there. I'm not sure if Delta Force will be able to do just that, considering what I've seen and experienced so far as a whole. But maybe good updates and content, as I described here also in the video, can make it possible for the game to also manage to have an audience and player base for that sake also in the long run. With that said, I want to say thank you for watching, and of course I would love to hear from you as well. I find it's very interesting, being a gamer at heart, and I listen to you guys also when it comes to your comments, and I try to answer them as well. So take care now, and if you enjoyed the video, please give a like, helps me out here on YouTube. And if you're new to my channel and if you want to watch more FPS gameplay, then hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you soon again in my next video. Take care now, have a beautiful day, and game on. Later.
Reloading. Enemy has taken over objective Delta 1.